Welcome back. This is us from DragonCon talking about dungeon mastering. I am Rush Lilavivat. I am the director of tabletop panels at DragonCon, and I am a, a published author. I've published things in the gaming sphere. I've also been fortunate enough to win the top game master award at DragonCon twice. And I currently direct that panel track. I will let my esteemed co-hosts introduce themselves. Abby, go ahead.
I'm Abby. I'm one of the volunteers at DragonCon and run the social medias for the Twitter and Instagram for DragonCon Tabletop Track. John?
Awesome. I'm Sean Molly. I am a dungeon master. I have been doing this for way too long. I have only won the best dungeon master award at DragonCon once, so that means Rush is twice as good of a DM as I am. But
100% not.
I have been pretty heavily involved with organized play, in particular over the years. So the various RPGA campaigns, and I have run a ton of games at DragonCon. So.
As I was saying right before we started, Sean has GM'd literally for thousands upon thousands of hours, because when you are a GM for organized play, you not only will run lots of people through an adventure, a lot of times to make sure that you get to play all the adventures, you'll kind of do this switcheroo. You'll do a round robin where other people, you run games for other game masters so that they can play the adventure that they're running. So it ends up you end up running a lot of games. So kudos to Sean for bringing so many people in the hobby and making sure that they have fun.
Well, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Increasing the total amount of fun in the universe.
So. Yeah, I agree. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's what our sign off is, as a matter of fact. So let's get into it. What we're talking about today is thinking in your feet. Now, that sounds like it's a very obvious skill for game masters to have. And often when we talk about game mastering, thinking on your feet is one of the things that always comes up. But it is often something that is so understood, so inherent to game mastering that people don't really examine it very well. Often when game mastering is discussed, what is discussed is the steps right after you think on your feet, 2 or 3 steps after you think on your feet. And I don't think enough time is spent on the actual thinking on your feet and what is involved. So to give you an example of what I'm talking about specifically, because that's a very broad topic, right? Everybody thinks on their feet every day. I'm going to give you an example, and then I'm going to break it down for you guys, and then we'll open it up for a broader discussion of the various skills involved. So, you know what, Abby and Sean, both of you, let's say you're playing in a D&D game, and you find yourself on a fantasy street. The streets are cobblestone and worn over the years from the wagons going back and forth that have even made ruts in the street. The buildings to either side of you are about 2 to 3 stories tall, most of them 3 stories tall, that overhang the street a little bit to allow people to pour things out of the windows. The various wagons and folk moving about are of a wide variety. There are elves and dwarves, even a few goblins or two, but walking back and forth. And up ahead, you see the Happy Hippogriff, a tavern of good repute. And to the side, you see a potion shop and an armorer's shop as well, with the clang of metal going on at this time. Up ahead, just beyond the Happy Hippogriff, you see a farmer, a goblin farmer in a wagon, who is herding small piglets onto the back of the wagon. Where would you like to go from here?
I think the potion shop sounds fun.
Okay, so let me pause everything right here. Let's pretend for a minute that I'm kind of a beginning game master, and I thought everybody was going to go to the tavern.
Right.
Now I'm like, oh my gosh, they're going to the potion shop. Now, what a lot of game masters I've seen, beginning game masters in particular, will be like, okay, you go to the potion shop and there's a potion guy there and you can buy some potions. Well, now that's a missed opportunity, So let's unpause and we'll just proceed. So you walk into the potion shop, and you notice above the sign above the door says Gregor's Potions. Within, you see a small, diminutive man, a gnome, with whose head is shiny and bald, and he has large, buggy eyes, and he kind of paces back and forth, and he's talking to one of the patrons, who wraps up a potion in a brown paper bag, and he looks over at you, and he's like, "Oh yes, come in. Yes, yes, come into Gregor's shop. Come in, come in. I have many things here for you. To my left, you have many of the healing potions that everyone seems to want. They are always getting injured. To my right, my specialty, transformation potions, things that turn one thing into another. And back here behind me are the most exclusive of the potions, things that are extremely rare for the right price. What can I interest you with?"
Well, my pouch is usually a little light at the beginning of adventures, so perhaps I'll just look to stock up on some of the essentials, my good gnome.
Okay, you want a Tanglefoot bag or perhaps a Alchemist Fire? These are cheaper.
Yes, Alchemist Fire is excellent. I like watching my foes run around engulfed in flames.
Well, here's two Alchemist Fires. I can give you these for 5 gold piece apiece. But if you are wanting something a little more special, perhaps we can make out a deal. Are you perhaps go if you perhaps go by the Fading Meadow, which is outside of the town, not too far. There's a rare flower that you can pick from there. Should you get it for me, I can give you one of the rare transformation potions, ones that can make you stronger or faster or quicker in the mind.
That sounds great. Abby, what do you think?
I think we should go get this flower. I think it'd be very fun.
Ah, very good, very good. I can even give you a small advance, but only one. The first one, as they say, is free. After that, it must come out of your own pocket. Yes.
I love free samples.
Okay. He reaches behind himself to the exclusive potions and gives you a small black bottle and tells you to be careful with it. Okay, we will stop there. So that was 110% improv. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of break it down, and then I'll let my co-hosts comment. So when you walk into any place, let's pretend I had anticipated them to go to the tavern, but they didn't. As soon as you walk into a potion shop or an armorer or whatever, you can either play up with type or against type. So with type might have been like an old grandfatherly friendly guy who's got a bunch of potions. I decided to go against type. So I was like, what about something like funny or a little bit odd? Because when I think of a potion shop, I think of something exotic. So that's step one. You can play up with type or against type. Then you have to think, what would this person logically have? So my next train of thought was, if I just have a bunch of potions, that's kind of boring. Surely this guy probably has I got a gnome in my head. Surely this guy has a specialty. What might his specialty be? How about transformation potions? And the reason I got that idea was because recently in my games, I've had a lot of players have a lot of fun with transformation magical items. I had somebody who had a bag of who had one of the old-fashioned bag of beans. From first edition, and one of them produces a tree that has exploding fruit and stuff like that. So that's where I got that idea from. So I drew from past experience. Okay, and then I thought logically, what would this crazy gnome have? Transformation potions, and then I drew on past experience, and then finally I'm going to link it back to my main idea, my story drivers. So I thought, what about the Fading Meadow? Because the adventure that I just had, I walked in here with just one idea. Was recently I've run an adventure that involves a lot of doppelgangers. So I said, what if this adventure has doppelgangers in it? How do I link the party back into the story? Let's pretend that the Fading Meadow is going to have something to do with those doppelgangers. and I can even pause the game. I can take. I said, let's take a 5-minute break, and I can write down a few notes to get people back in on the main storyline. So that is okay. That is thinking on your feet. So again, you think, am I going to play against type or with type? What does this person or place logically have, and how can I bring it back to the main story? And any comments from you guys?
I mean, I think one thing that you sort of say with the fading meadow is kind of putting things in your player's way. And so I've known many a GM be like, but they didn't go there, so how am I going to get to the story beat that I'd planned? Have a different NPC give them the idea. It doesn't have to be the tavern keeper. It can be the blacksmith.
That's exactly right. I agree very much.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. You wanted the party to get to the fading meadow one way or another. It makes little difference how they get there. It only matters that they get there. And so no matter which direction they go, there's going to be a reason for them to go to the fading meadow. The tavern keeper might have been out of a particular delicious ale that the dwarf in the party, who loves to have the rare ale every time they go into town. Oh, I was just about to brew up another batch, but I'm all out of this particular flour.
I only drink DPAs.
Exactly. In your initial description of the street, you provided both things that are expected. There's an armor, there's a potion shop, there's obviously the tavern, and then you provided one thing that was unexpected, perhaps, depending on the world where the campaign is set, which was the goblin farmer. And so knowing your players a little bit, if you have that luxury, you can often predict what they're going to latch on to. And so, as a player, I will always latch on to the weirdest thing in the scene. And so I would have gone toward the goblin farmer. You went toward the potion shop, which worked equally as well because we were still able to get to where we needed to be. And what's cool about that is you railroaded the players in the sense that they ended up in the Forgotten Meadow regardless, but they didn't feel that way. They felt like their choice shaped that story, and that had they gone into the tavern, they might have ended up in the woods, or they might have ended up going off on a completely different adventure. So. And
it's interesting you mentioned railroading, because I know a lot of people complain about railroady DMs, and I think that's sort of the mastery of it, is being able to railroad your players without them knowing that you're doing it.
Exactly.
Because all of us that GM are railroaders. We all want us to tell a story that we've prepped for. We all do it, so we just have to be sneaky.
Well, that can get very, very complicated. There are some GMs who are 100% improv, where they literally are not quite sure where the story is going to end until midway through the story, or sometimes even the end. But your point's still taken. Everybody has a different GM style, and if you are the kind that has a certain plot in mind, that's great advice for that. About that, Sean, in a way, you are railroading your players back to the fading meadow, but at the same time, the players have had a definite effect on the storyline. Had they gone to the tavern, they wouldn't have 2 alchemist fires and perhaps this other cool potion that does something.
Absolutely, and it really depends on the why were the players in the town in the first place, right? Was this just the beginning of the adventure? You could have just as easily started the party in the tavern, because all adventures start in the tavern, right? But by not doing that, by pulling the camera back and starting on the streetscape, you give the opportunity for the players to actually kind of craft the way they get into the adventure in a much more organic way. And it's so much is dependent on the setup. Is this a convention game where you're only going to see these folks for 3 or 4 hours and then none of you are ever going to see each other again? Is this a home game where it's a campaign and this is adventure 8 of 16 of a big story arc that's been building up? Why were we in the town in the first place? And so with all of that knowledge in the back of your mind, as the game master, you can sort of say, okay, even if it's a completely sandbox game, even if it's a open map and the players read the notice board in the town and they hear about the wyvern that's terrorizing the farmers by eating their sheep, and they hear about the goblin farmers that their dam keeps getting knocked over and flooding their fields, and they go wherever they want to go. You've you've still got a notion of what is in the world and where it is. And so you can kind of take that background knowledge that you have, and you can parcel that out to the players based on what they are drawn to. And you don't have to really determine, any of that. Or if it's a very narrative driven game, there's something, I really need you to see what's in the Forgotten Meadow. And so, no matter where you go in town, everybody's talking about the Forgotten Meadow. And so, the players are going to pick up on that just because you're putting it in the spotlight so much.
So Sean, for you, when it comes to coming up with an idea right off the seat of your pants, let's start with location, because I think it's a little bit less complicated to talk about. If you're having to come up with a location off of the top of your head,
mm-hmm.
what would you say 3 things are that you would do if you what are 3 things you would tell, let's say, a beginning game master?
Yeah, great question. So I always want to know why. Why does this location exist? I don't have to make up 500 years of history for the abandoned temple, but what kind of temple was it? Was it a temple to a good deity? Was it a temple to an evil deity? Was it a harvest festival where people came once a year, to bring their crops? And so I want to come up with something that defines the reason why this place matters. And then there's a motivation. Why are we going here? There's thousands of temples in the world. Why this one and why now? Well, it's because the evil warlock is about to perform a ritual at midnight that's going to summon something, or it's because it's time for the harvest festival and, we want to be a part of that. So why is this place here? Why are we here? And then what is logically, I think you described it well, what's the stereotypical version of this? Do I want to align with that stereotypical version of it, or do I want to play against it? And then what should I expect to find? If I said you're going to the darkened temple of evil at midnight to stop the warlock from casting the demon summoning ritual, you're expecting certain things already. You're probably expecting a pentagram and candles and chanting and hooded cultists and, a shaft of moonlight coming down and illuminating the villain as they raise their sacrificial dagger, right? And just from there, you've got a scene. You could get a ton of mileage out of that. Maybe it's a combat, maybe it's not. Maybe they're sneaking up, maybe they're just going to rush in, swords drawn. But right then you've kind of drawn enough that you should be able to, especially with the player's help, you should be able to build on that skeleton pretty effectively as you go through the scene.
Abby, how about you? When it comes to location.
Yeah, when it comes to location, I think the why is this here is the biggest piece for me. And does that play into anything else in the world? So now that I have this shop, what does that say about the people who live around the shop? Is it a clothing shop? Do they value fashion? Is it a potion shop prone to possible explosions? So therefore, are people around this space? Is it isolated? Is it in a strip mall? These are questions that I think of, because then it expands out the rest of the area surrounding it.
I really like the idea of so if it's a potion shop and things explode, then maybe people aren't around it. I really like that, because then that provokes more storytelling. It could provoke people curious. Why is this place by itself? Or I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It rewards players when they go there and they discover, oh, that's why there are no other shops around here, because they're afraid of the explosions. There's a reward there because you've made a connection in your world. So I like that a lot.
And
I also watch a lot of documentaries, and so learn a lot about historical peoples who built their homes in this particular fashion. And so that's another thing that I try to think about is, okay, if it's going to explode and has fire going, it probably doesn't have a thatch roof. It probably has something a little more sturdy compared to a little more fire resistant than just straw layered on layer. If it's in a dwarven mountain, it's probably just carved into the rock.
Yeah, it fits into the ecology of the place where it is, and that automatically gives it verisimilitude, which I think is fantastic. What I was struck by as you were describing it is you also set yourself up for some really evocative descriptions of the place. Well, it's a potion shop and things explode a lot. So now you can involve other senses. There's an acrid smell hanging in the air, because just before you got there, the gnome comes running out of the back with their hair on fire because something just blew up in the potbelly stove in the back. And so anytime you can engage all the senses and not just describe how things look, I think you get a place that feels more real.
And I think it also helps influence the type of people who would be working there, because someone who's going to handle explosives has to be just a little bit off their rocker. Like, not completely, but just a little bit, because they're doing a very dangerous job. And then you have people that are super into fashion. They might be a little more like, oh, you're wearing so last year's fashion. Might be a little more snotty about it. And so then that sort of influences the personality of those that are in the space.
Okay, that makes a perfect transition to now talking about people. So coming up with NPCs in the fly, Sean, what's a way? If you were going to talk to a beginning game master, what are 3 things you would tell them about making an NPC in the fly?
Yeah, so I know that I am very bad at coming up with names on the fly, and so sort of rule 0 for me in terms of improvisation is don't feel like you have to improvise every single thing. And so if I know that I'm going to be running a game where the characters are very likely to encounter NPCs that I have not made up yet, I'm going to come prepared with a list of 20, decent names. And I'm going to have that taped to the inside of my GM screen, because what you don't want to do is, we walked into it was Gregor's Potions, right? And it was very smooth. It was always Gregor's Potions as far as we knew. But of course, you pulled that out instantly. But if it had been, you walk in and there's a sign and it's Schmedley's, Stinky's Potions. Yeah, Stinky's Potions, right? You're breaking the flow. And so know what you have a hard time coming up with. And for me, it's names, and there are a million fantasy name generators. So that's kind of the 0th thing. Not every character needs a ton of detail. And so the big advice I would say is, we're going to see Gregor, the potion making gnome, possibly twice. Once at the beginning when he sent us to the meadow to get the flower, and once at the end when we return the flower. If that's likely to be the case, Gregor doesn't need a lot of detail. He's got a name, he's got his job, he runs the potion shop, and you gave him a nice accent and a little bit of a mannerism. Boom, you're done. You want to invest in an NPC proportional to the amount of screen time that NPC is going to get. I don't need to know where Gregor went to school or who his childhood friends were, because those things are never going to come out in the game. If Gregor is actually the main doppelganger and the villain of the piece, however, then Gregor probably deserves a little bit more thought and backstory put into him. And what's great about D&D and role-playing games in general is I usually don't decide which of those NPCs are going to be sort of promoted to main cast until I see how the player characters and the players actually react to them. And so if they love Gregor and they think Gregor is awesome, and they're like, oh, every time we see a strange plant, we should pick that and we should bring that back and see if Gregor wants it. Well, Gregor just got a promotion. Gregor is now probably recurring cast. And so you can defer a lot of those decisions until you see how folks react. So to bring it back, do a little bit of prep. Not everything has to be done off the top of your head, especially things that are difficult to come up with on the fly. Get a sense of, give a characterization that is simple and broad, and usually, one thing is all that you need to make a character memorable, and then see what happens.
Abby, how about you?
If you want to flesh out NPCs, even if they're just one-off NPCs a little more, give them like one characteristic trait. Are they super tall? Do they have a huge disproportionate nose? Do they have this like luscious, luxurious locks that you're just like, oh, wow, what conditioner do you use? Like one little thing will really sort of flesh out that character that much more. Names are not something I have a huge problem with, just because I watch a lot of Barbie movies, and I specifically watch a lot of Barbie fantasy movies. So I always just kind of file those names away. So it's like, oh, I have an NPC I haven't prepped for. His name is Dominic, because that's the first Barbie prince I can think of. The other thing that helped me with names a lot was Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, because all of the Magma have names based on metal. So there's like lead, gold, cobalt. They're all based on like metals and rocks. And then you have the Kikwees that are based on teas. So you have like Yerbal and Urla. Like Ulu's another one. And then you have your Skyloftians, who are all named after birds. Sparrowt, Pipit, Karain. Like, they're great names. It's a great naming convention to then take and use later.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
my big struggle with NPCs is differentiating them from the previous NPC.
Every dwarven blacksmith has the same Scottish accent problem.
Yeah, a little bit. They're all a little gruff. They all have the big beard.
Right.
That is the one. That's the one thing I need to work on myself, is making these different people and not just carbon copies.
No, I totally agree. That is something that we should probably do in a whole other episode.
Yeah.
Because that's one of those refinements, I would say. Yeah, for myself, I'm always in the car practicing different accents, and so the NPCs that you get are usually one of 5 accents that I've been practicing. So, for example, I got intrigued by the Yorkshire accent because we were watching a bunch of things that were set in Yorkshire. The Yorkshire accent is so different from the rest of the British Isles that I started playing around with it. And then me and my youngest son started playing around with the Australian accent. So it was actually fun to have people in a fantasy realm that have an Australian accent, because that makes them a bit different, right? They're not from around there. They are from some distant land that where they're outdoors all the time. So that's kind of fun. So that's how I usually get that. Somebody gets one of the 5 accents I've been playing with.
Rush, have you been seeing the elves with country accents?
No,
Oh, it's so funny. I'll send you some stuff. But yeah, it's been a big thing on TikTok, where it's like, high elves have like these country Appalachian accents. It's so funny. Perfection.
That's really cool. No, I would love to see that. Absolutely. So we have the basis of how you come up with an NPC out of your pocket. Sean, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to note on accents. One thing that can be tough as a relatively new game master is you don't have a lot of different accents in your bag. You don't have, every NPC does not have to have an accent.
Right.
That can be a real struggle to try to think of, okay, what am I going to do? You can characterize an NPC in a million other ways. You can give them a mannerism. Abby gave the great example of, maybe they have luxurious hair that they're always playing around with, or maybe they wear glasses and they can't see, so they get up close when they talk to somebody. There are again, these are broad strokes. They don't have to be super detailed, and you only need one. If you try to give an NPC 2 or 3 or 4 distinctive mannerisms, the players are not going to remember them anyway. They're going to remember the one unique thing about that character. I will sometimes just jot down a list of 20 adjectives, and I'll just pull off the top of the list. Inquisitive. Oh, what's that in your backpack? Oh, that's really interesting. Wow, where'd you get that sword? That's the shiniest pommel I've ever seen on the sword. That's amazing. I guess you never you must spend a lot of time in camp polishing that sword up. That's incredible. Or disdainful, or yeah, I suppose I could sell you some armor, but I don't know. You look like you're just gonna get it punched full of holes the first time you go in the dungeon. And right, just pull an adjective off the list, and oftentimes the way that NPC will behave flows pretty naturally.
I really like how you said that, because it links exactly with what Abby you were saying. With you just need the one really strong detail, and how you brought up it can boil down to just a single adjective, and then from that you don't need an accent. You just the mannerisms that you have by either being disdainful or inquisitive will kind of come naturally to you.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, Abby, go ahead.
The one other thing about accents too is there has been some discourse about like exoticizing accents. So especially for like white GMs using kind of the stereotypical
Mhm.
me love you long time type accent. It's like, let's maybe not do that. So in cases where you're wondering, is this going to be okay for me to use, or is this going to be insulting? There's a way to sort of describe the way that they speak rather than impersonate it. So that's another thing you can do too.
Oh,
Yeah.
I really like how you said that.
Yep. Yeah. Nobody wants to meet Jar Jar Binks at the table.
Yeah, like you could do it like the very first time you meet your Jar Jar like character, and so the first thing he says is the standard Misa think.
Right.
Misa think you spend a lot of time polishing your sword, whatever it is that you want that character to say, and then fall back into your normal voice, because once you've described it, once you've used it, they will still remember that even if you don't continue to use it. Don't hurt your voice just for the bit.
Right. No, that's a great
Right.
point. And hearing everybody at the table, like I'm from Kentucky, and so if I sit down and the DM launches into the redneck accent, I have to think, oh, what is that me? Is that So you definitely want to be thoughtful. I had a group of all players from Scotland at my table, and I did not. None of my dwarves had a Scottish accent that day. That was just not going to go well.
You definitely don't want to embarrass yourself in front of people with that accent.
Exactly. So
I'm really glad you brought that up, because it is a very nuanced topic, because at the same time, I've heard a lot of people like really dial it back and say, well, I don't want to do any accents because I'm afraid of stepping on something. And my take has been, well, wait a minute. And so for a while I myself was dialing it back, but then I said, well, when I read to this is what it boiled down to. When I read to my kids when they were little, did I do accents? Yes. And did that help with the storytelling? 100% yes, right? It made the story come to life. So
Mhm.
I don't do anything I wouldn't have done for my young children, right? If
I think that's smart.
it was okay for my young children, then it was okay for me. So that was the litmus test for me, which meant that sometimes I had bad Scottish accents, but
a gloriously bad Scottish accent
right.
is clearly gloriously bad, right? So.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think that's the thing, is that if it's clear that it's over the top and we're having fun with it, this is like an SNL skit, then we all are on the same page. Right.
We already have dragons. We do not need to have real accents. They do not need to be the perfect, I could pass for Scottish.
So as far as like thinking on the fly, and all GMs have to do it. Do you guys have any tips on things that you wish you would see game masters do more of when they think on the fly?
One thing that I see a little bit of, and I think new game masters get freaked out by the idea.
Mhm.
In Dimension 20, there are moments where you can tell that someone has thrown Brennan a curveball, because he'll kind of sit there for maybe a whole minute and just kind of be like, yeah. And you can tell that he's like thinking about, okay, how am I going to make this work? How are we going to put this into mechanics? I wish that new game masters wouldn't be so scared of that pause.
I agree very much.
Yeah, I think pauses always feel longer to you than they do to everybody else, right? Because you're sitting there and it's like everybody's looking at me. So a couple things you can do while you are gathering your thoughts. You can always sort of temporize and give the players an opportunity to contribute back, right? And so there's a game in Improv called Only Questions. And so, the player comes into the store and they rush up to Gregor, the potion seller, and they say, I need a potion that'll turn me into a red dragon. And you're like, oh man, I didn't have any idea. Does Gregor even have a potion like that? So the first thing I'm going to say is, that's amazing, sir. Why ever would you want to turn yourself into a red dragon? And now that player is going to explain exactly why they want to turn themselves into a red dragon. And while they're talking, I'm thinking, is this even something that I want? Does this even exist in the game? I don't know, well, it starts by finding a flower in the Forgotten Meadow. I can tell you that. And so giving the players an opportunity to flesh out the scene is always a safe thing to do. Of course, you turn it back on them and then they pause. So it can become a game.
It's funny you mention it that way. I played an NPC in a Vampire the Masquerade game. So I just came on as a guest character, but that's an NPC. And the what's the GM name for Vampire? Is it Keeper, I think? The Lore Keeper? They gave me all these notes to prep me for who this character was, what kind of questions the player characters might ask them. And of course, when we get in there, there's obviously things that they didn't think about, and that's totally fine. But so then I had to sort of craft a response that was a little more wordy, a little bit lengthy, and maybe ask them a question back so that the keeper had time to be like, okay, here's the answer to that question.
Right.
And that was a very, very interesting dynamic to try and buy time for both the GM and myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gives the NPC a little bit of an air of mystery. Well, of course I know, but why don't you explain it to me?
Exactly.
That way we'll see how well you know the truth about how to make a potion of red dragon transmutation.
I really like what you said, Abby, about taking a pause and taking a minute. There is absolutely nothing wrong with pausing the whole game and say, let's take a 5-minute break. I need to go over some things. One of the great examples I can think of is there's a wonderful game that is no longer in print, but you can still find it, called With Great Power. It's a superhero game. And in the game, you're supposed to make characters at session 0. And only after all the characters are made do you come up with a villain. The villain has to fit the characters. So you can't even, you're not even supposed to have a villain set up ahead of time. So that requires the game master to say, okay, everybody take like a 10 or 15 minute break. I will come back and we'll start the game. And from that, I came up with one of my better villains that I've ever had, because I was able to take that time and I didn't feel uber pressure to come up with an NPC on the spot. And it ended up being a house mom with 5 children, who was the supervillain, and she was extremely creepy. All of her children had. So I started with that premise, and so this is about thinking in your feet. I said, what is going to make, if she's going to be the villain of the story, if she's going to be really sinister, what is going to make that even more sinister? Well, let's say her 5 children are all psychic, and they have these immense psychic powers. But at the same time, she's one of these really hyper A-type personality moms. So she's got these French flashcards that she's showing them, and like, all right, okay, good. Now in French, very good. All right, okay. Remember, you need to clean up your station once you're done, And so she would pause and have these little mom moments with them, and then like, okay, well, the bad man has decided that we're not going to get in the car. What do we say about that to the bad man? Take a long walk off a short bridge. Okay. Thank you. All right. So all of that came from thinking off the, it came from taking a pause, taking a moment. And then every single moment after that was, again, the thinking logically point that I made. Like, okay, logically, if this person is really bad, what would they do? How would they act? What kind of house would they have? What would her children be like?
Mm-hmm.
And you start with all these premises, and then that's how all these things unfold. So,
and if you are playing a campaign game where you do have the luxury of a session 0, which I highly recommend for all campaigns, something about the characters as well, right? And so anytime I have an opportunity to work something in that I know comes from a character's backstory, I will see if I can find a way. Maybe one character is they're trying to prove themselves as a member of a knightly order. Oh well, maybe Gregor had a really bad experience with another member of that knightly order and sees the rose on the knight's armor and says, "Oh, you Knights of the Rose, always, never live up to your ideals, always shaking down innocent merchants like me." Just a hook that you already had in your back pocket of something that matters to that particular character. Now you're in that, they're invested in that. They're very invested in Gregor now. They want to make sure that Gregor is going to walk away with a good impression of their knighthood after that. So, and I think again, it boils down to the less experience that you have as a game master, the more you benefit from prep. From having spent a little bit of time beforehand. What you don't have to go all the way to running, pre-written other people's published adventures, although running other people's pre-written published adventures is a great way to learn how writers tend to structure, storylines. But an hour even before the game, just to have a few things already, partially fleshed out that you can have in your back pocket will go a long way toward making the game flow smoothly. And the players, Abby said it great earlier, that pause is not, the players don't even remember that. All they remember is that you kept making stuff up.
Right, absolutely. So thank you, everybody. That was wonderful, and we're out of time. So
before we jump off, do you want to present one idea that will also help with thinking on the fly?
Absolutely.
Because I have this whole set of randomizer dice.
Nice.
And that's all they are. So I've got this one that has oh, maybe they're a little flirty, maybe they're really awkward or really upset. I've got one that's like the type of enemy you're going to fight. So an ooze, an aboleth, a dragon. I've got one for classes and races for D&D. I've got one for weather, got one for loot. You have friend and foe on this one, and somewhere, here it is, higher level, lower level. So a lot of these are for like combat, but you could easily use these for making NPCs as well.
Absolutely.
That is wonderful advice. Wonderful advice. I use a book called Roll and Play. It's from the company Roll and Play that has lists of names of NPCs and places and things like that and descriptions. But what I like about exactly what you said is often I will look at that and I'll be like, you know what? I'm not going to have the tavern that they wrote, but I'm going to have one adjacent to it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so just like you said, I might roll the randomizer and be like, you know what? I'm not going to go with a elven sorcerer. I'm going to go with a dwarven sorcerer. But at least that got your mind thinking.
Exactly.
So I love that a lot.
Yeah, and the one thing to bear in mind if you are going to be returning to these NPCs or these locations is, unless you have a much better memory than I do, jot down what you did, right? So Gregor, the potion store owning gnome, if I'm running that game, I'm going to note that the potion store is run by a gnome named Gregor, so that the next time the folks are in that village, which might be 10 sessions later, it's either still going to be Gregor, in which case we have already a relationship built, or Gregor's not there anymore. Well, that's interesting. What happened to Gregor? Right. And so, but that continuity is important if the game is going to be, have the feeling of a persistent world. But I love the randomizer dice. Those are awesome.
Yeah, they're great. I love them.
All right, we are out of time. So before we go, I will leave you with this. Dice were rolled, roles were played, play was fun, and what else is there in life if not play?
Amen.
See you next time. Bye.